I returned from Nepal expecting to find my home exactly as I'd left it. Instead, I discovered my backyard transformed into a luxury Airbnb by my own HOA. They'd demolished everything: my garden, the tree my mother planted, even my shed. But in their greed, they'd made a fatal error. Buried beneath that shed was something far more valuable than land: an old metal box bearing a rusted FBI insignia. Before I could even process what it meant, federal agents were at my door. What had my grandfather hidden? Why was the FBI so quick to act? And just how deep did this HOA's corruption run? This wasn't just about reclaiming my property anymore. It was about unearthing a truth buried for decades. Where are you reading from? Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this story and want more wild HOA takedowns. Hit that subscribe button if you're in. The taxi rolled to a stop in front of my house, its tires crunching against the familiar brick driveway. I inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp air of home after a year abroad. The thought of returning to my quiet sanctuary, my peaceful backyard, my carefully tended garden, should have brought comfort. But as I glanced toward my yard, everything had changed. Instead of the tranquil haven I'd spent over a decade nurturing, I faced a bizarre sight: a row of sleek, modern guest houses arranged like a high-end resort. String lights twinkled over manicured patios, cushioned lounge chairs lined the paths, and a polished wooden sign by the gate read, "Willow Grove Retreat," a premium stay in suburbia. I blinked, my breath catching. This was my backyard, the land I'd poured my heart into, now turned into some upscale Airbnb village bustling with strangers, as if I'd stepped into a hotel lobby. "Excuse me, are you the manager?" I turned to see a middle-aged woman wheeling a suitcase up the path, eyeing me expectantly. "I'm here for check-in. I booked last week." My pulse thundered. "Check-in? Booked? I'm the owner of this property," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Before I could grasp the insanity of it, a gratingly familiar voice sliced through the air. "Oh, the owner, are you?" I spun to face Linda Grayson, the HOA president, striding toward me with smug confidence. She wore a crisp navy blazer, her auburn hair pulled into a tight bun, exuding authority. "Back earlier than expected," she said, arms crossed. "I thought you'd abandoned us for good." "Explain this," I demanded, fists clenching. "Why is my backyard an Airbnb?" Linda shrugged dramatically. "Simple. Per HOA Bylaw 47B, if a property's deemed abandoned for over 6 months with no clear communication from the owner, it can be repurposed for community benefit." The board voted unanimously. "We've invested heavily in this project. It's far more useful than that jungle of weeds you left behind, don't you think?" Rage boiled inside me. I didn't abandon anything. I paid every bill in advance. "I have proof." Linda chuckled, dripping with condescension. "Oh, keep your receipts, but the land belongs to the HOA now. And if you keep making a scene, we might have to ask you to leave." Cold fury settled in my chest. They'd stolen my property, turned it into a cash cow, and now they wanted me gone. I exhaled slowly, glaring at Linda as she smirked. They'd messed with the wrong homeowner. I took a step closer. "I want the paperwork. The legal documents proving my land isn't mine anymore." Linda sighed theatrically, waving a hand toward a man nearby. He was lanky, with thinning gray hair, clutching a leather briefcase. "This is Gerald Pierce, our HOA attorney," she said. Gerald adjusted his glasses, flipping open his case. "Per Bylaw 47B, a property vacant for over 6 months without formal notice is classified as abandoned. We posted a notice on your door and in the HOA newsletter. With no response, the board legally repurposed it." I gritted my teeth. I wasn't vacant. I was abroad. I paid my bills. I notified the post office. Gerald didn't flinch. "Notice must go directly to the HOA per Section 12A. Without it, your property was deemed abandoned, and the transfer was legal." Linda beamed. "So, this charming retreat is here to stay." Fury surged so fiercely I could barely think. This wasn't just theft, it was a calculated heist. Before I could reply, a familiar voice called out, "You're back." I turned to see Evelyn Carter, my elderly neighbor, hurrying over, her white curls bouncing. Her face was a mix of relief and anger. I called, emailed. No one listened. She grabbed my arm, glaring at Linda. "I told you he was traveling. I showed you proof. Linda's smile faltered briefly before she regained composure. Your input was noted, Evelyn, but the board voted unanimously. Evelyn spun to me. They bulldozed everything. Your garden, your mom's tree, your shed. Gone. Replaced with these overpriced motel rooms. My blood ran cold. My shed? I turned sharply to where it once stood. Now a paved walkway led to a guest house. But something was off. The ground looked disturbed beyond mere construction. A few feet away, two men in dark vests knelt by a foundation, sifting dirt and bagging objects. What's happening over there? I asked, heart racing. Linda stiffened. That's unrelated. Evelyn leaned in, whispering. They found something under your shed. A chill crept up my spine. Linda was already on her phone, her grip tight. Something was very wrong. Did the HOA have the right to take my property, or was this a total abuse of power? Comment yes if you think they were justified. No if they crossed the line. I barely registered Evelyn's words over the pounding in my ears. They found something under my shed. I stepped forward, but Linda's hand shot out, gripping my arm hard. That area's off limits, she snapped. I yanked free. Off limits on my property. Linda forced a tight smile, glancing at Gerald, who now looked uneasy. It's a minor issue. Nothing for you to worry about. Ignoring her, I strode toward the men in vests. Up close, their uniforms lacked any company logo. They were handling the dirt with precision, unearthing something metallic. One noticed me and stiffened, exchanging a glance with his partner before standing to block my view. This is private property, I said, voice hard. What are you digging up? Before he could answer, Linda's shrill voice cut in. You're not authorized to interfere. Mark, escort him off. I turned to see a hulking security guard lumbering toward me. Don't even try it, I warned, squaring up. Evelyn stepped forward, brandishing her cane. Touch him, and I'll make sure every neighbor knows what you're hiding. Mark hesitated, looking to Linda, who seemed ready to combust. Evelyn seized the moment. Tell him what you found, she hissed at the diggers. Silence hung heavy. Then, as if deciding it wasn't worth the fight, one turned and pointed to the dirt. I stepped closer and froze. A rusted metal box, partially unearthed, gleamed faintly. Something about it felt familiar, my grandfather's basement, decades ago. My throat tightened. He'd always warned me, never move the shed. Never dig there. What's buried stays buried. I thought it was just an old man's quirk. Now, I wasn't so sure. One worker shone a flashlight on the box, wiping dirt from an emblem. My stomach dropped, an old FBI insignia. Before I could react, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his movements crisp and deliberate. Sunglasses hid his eyes, but the badge on his chest read FBI. Linda paled. Whatever was under my shed, it was big, and she was no longer in control. The tension thickened as the SUV's door slammed shut. The man strode toward us, exuding authority. The diggers straightened like soldiers. Linda's confident mask cracked. Her hand trembled around her phone. The agent stopped before me, flipping open a badge. Special Agent Daniel Hayes, FBI, he said, his voice calm but commanding. His gaze shifted to the box. You the property owner? I squared my shoulders. Yes, and I'd like to know why my backyard's a federal dig site. Linda forced a laugh, stepping forward. Agent Hayes, this is a misunderstanding. This is HOA property now. Hayes silenced her with a glance. Ma'am, this is a federal matter. The HOA has no say here. Linda's face drained of color. Evelyn snorted triumphantly. Ignoring Linda, Hayes turned to me. Sir, do you know anything about this? He gestured to the box. I hesitated. Never dig there. No, I said, but my grandfather did. He warned me not to touch this spot. Hayes' jaw tightened slightly. He signaled the diggers, now clearly forensic techs. Carefully remove it. They nodded, brushing away dirt before lifting the box free. Up close, it was more than rusted metal. It was locked tight, with faded stenciled letters, classified property. Hayes exhaled sharply. That's what I thought. Linda gasped. This changes nothing. The HOA still controls this land. Hayes pulled a folded document from his coat and handed it to me. This says otherwise. My hands shook as I opened it. A 1947 deed from the federal government, granting this land to my grandfather and his descendants. The HOA's claim evaporated in an instant. Linda's phone buzzed. She checked it, paling further. What do you mean our permits weren't filed? She whispered into it, then stopped, glaring at me with venom. This isn't over, she hissed, storming off. I exhaled, relief mixing with unease. Evelyn patted my arm. This is getting exciting. I wasn't so sure. Hayes' expression grew grave. Mr. Lawson, we need to talk about what your grandfather was involved in. My mind raced as I followed him to the curb. What had my grandfather hidden? Evelyn squeezed my arm reassuringly, but I saw her curiosity mirrored mine. Linda stood frozen nearby, clutching her phone like a lifeline, her empire crumbling. Hayes stopped, voice low. This stays between us, understood? I nodded, pulse racing. The name Robert Lawson, your grandfather, appears in classified FBI records. He wasn't just an employee. He was a founder of an experimental forensic unit. I blinked. Forensic unit? Hayes nodded. Ever hear of Project Clarity? Top secret, late 1940s. They pioneered crime scene reconstruction, early DNA analysis, forensic psychology, modern investigations backbone. Your grandfather helped build it. I stared, stunned. Why keep that secret? Hayes' jaw tightened. Not all their methods were ethical. In the wrong hands, that knowledge was a weapon. Nations would have killed for it. My throat went dry. And you think something from Project Clarity was under my shed? Hayes glanced at the box. We'll find out. If he hid it this well, it's dangerous. A gust of wind rustled the trees, and I felt truly unsettled. I'd come home to fight for my land. But now, watching the FBI unearth my grandfather's secret, I realized this was far bigger than the HOA. Hayes stepped closer. Did he ever say anything about this? I forced myself to recall the late nights in his study, the double-checked locks, the warnings. He told me never to dig there, I admitted. Hayes studied me, then handed me a card. Meet me tomorrow at this address. We'll talk more. I pocketed it, a government building downtown. As he walked away, I saw Linda watching, her fury palpable. She'd stolen my yard, but she'd uncovered something she couldn't control. That night, I couldn't sleep. Hayes' card sat on my table, taunting me. What had my grandfather buried? Why the FBI's swift response? Needing answers, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The guest houses loomed, their porch lights a stark reminder of my stolen land. You shouldn't be out here, a soft voice said. Evelyn stood on her porch, shawl-wrapped. I approached, whispering, before the FBI showed up, what did the HOA say they were doing back here? She glanced around nervously. They claimed it was foundation work for more guest houses. But it wasn't true. I frowned. What do you mean? She leaned in. They were digging at night. Not construction workers. A chill hit me. Before I could respond, movement flickered near a guest house. A shadowy figure slipped between buildings. A thud followed, then a curse. I switched off my flashlight. Evelyn whispered, "Be careful." Heart pounding, I crept closer, sticking to shadows. A man in dark clothes knelt by a foundation, prying at the dirt. He wasn't just looking, he was searching. My foot snapped a twig. His head jerked up, eyes locking with mine. Then he bolted. Hey, I lunged, but he vanished into the night. Panting, I checked where he'd been. My fingers brushed metal in the dirt, a small, rusted key. What was the HOA hiding? Footsteps thundered, Linda's voice shrilled. What's going on? I pocketed the key as she stormed over with Mark. You're trespassing, she sneered. I stood tall. On my property. She smirked. Not anymore. Stay out of things you don't understand. I grinned back. Funny, I was about to say that to you. Walking away, the key's weight fueled my resolve. Linda had secrets, and I'd expose them all. The next morning, I woke determined. The key burned in my pocket. Someone had been after it, and Linda knew why. I couldn't fight alone anymore. The Willow Grove HOA meeting was packed, tension thick after the FBI's arrival. Linda stood up front, faking normalcy, but her shoulders were tense, her phone a constant distraction. As they droned about budgets, I cleared my throat. Before we move on, let's discuss something bigger. Linda's smile froze. Not now, Lawson. I ignored her. How about the HOA illegally seizing my land for profit? Or that you knew something was buried under my shed and covered it up? Murmurs erupted. Linda's face darkened. We followed protocol. Did you? I held up printed emails. Residents told you I was abroad. You ignored them, deliberately. Gasps spread. Evelyn stood. I told Linda he'd return, and they still took it. Linda glared. That's a misrepresentation. Is it? I snapped. I've got records showing the HOA made $200,000 in 3 months renting my land. Chaos broke loose, shouts, demands. A man rose, James Holt, the treasurer, pale. Linda, is that true? She faltered. Then the doors swung open. Agent Hayes strode in with 2 agents. Silence fell. Linda stiffened. Mrs. Grayson, Hayes said coolly, we need to talk about fraudulent land acquisition, fund misappropriation, and obstructing a federal investigation. Linda swallowed hard. Her empire was done, and I'd made sure of it.